I wanted to talk about something with Stephen Marche, who's been with us before, Canadian novelist, essayist, about an opinion piece he penned for the New York Times. The headline is one of those, and I guess, designed to kind of grab your attention, and it does. It says, "Profound and Abiding Rage, Canada's Answer to America's Abandonment." Stephen Marche is on the line. Stephen, thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Hi, Aaron. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I want to start with the first sentence, which really kind of drives home the point. It says, "Canada is living through an era of acute, sustained, profound, and abiding rage." You then write, "The source is President Trump." So, look, we've been going through this now for the last 3-4 months, maybe a little bit longer than that, I guess. You kind of wonder. Yeah, well, I guess since January, yeah, but I tend to think it got ramped up and we started hearing more about the annexation, although he hasn't talked about that in a while now. The idea of rage, I remember it's funny, we talked about this with the listeners just the other day. The idea when Mike Myers went on SNL and did the whole elbows up thing and we were gung-ho for a while, that seems to have been tempered to some degree, at least from, people we hear from, people that we talk to on a daily basis here. Is the rage in your mind still as high as it was back then?
Well, if you look at things like the boycotts to American travel, I mean, they're only increasing, right? I mean, July was the worst year for Canadians, the worst month for Canadians going to America since July. I think the rage is still ongoing, but there's a bit more practicality to it now. I think, steps have been sort of taken to get us out from under the American thumb as much as possible. And, I think it's like anything, the shock wears off and it just becomes your new normal. But the new normal is not a happy normal. Right, the new normal is not I guess everything's great in America. There are friends again. That's definitely not the new normal.
No, it seems it's kind of we've resigned ourselves to this, right? That it's not going to get better.
They're not changing.
Right.
I think this is not an anomaly. I think it's become very clear to everyone that the America that we're seeing now is the America that the American people have chosen, and that they actually want this, and that they want the police. The Marines on the streets of their cities, and they want this kind of breakdown of the rules-based order. And the abandonment is not necessarily the abandonment of Canada; it's the abandonment of the international system of government that they created after the Second World War. That's gone. So we have to adjust to that rather than pretending, rather than just getting angry. But, it's still, I think America at this moment is in one of its ugliest phases ever.
By the way, we do a little bit of navel gazing here because, we're Canadians, we're here, and this affects us directly between trade and tariffs. But you also mentioned in your piece about the rest of the world, if you will, the current world order, the global order. Other nations are waking up to this as well and taking steps to realize it's not going to be the same dealing with the U.S. going forward.
Well, I think it's the biggest deal for us because we're obviously the most connected. But Germany has changed massively over the past 6 months. I mean, they're about to, the German chancellor is talking about how they're going to be the biggest and most powerful army in Europe. That's not something we ever expected to hear Germans say about themselves with pride, in our lifetimes. But there it is. Japan is very much considering getting nuclear weapons or aligning itself with alliances outside of the West that have nuclear weapons, and that's a deep change to their post-war condition. So, I mean, it is truly a geopolitical movement because the United States is, retreating from its role as leader of the world. And everyone has to adjust, but Canada most of all.
So we heard Mark Carney, of course, after meeting with Donald Trump a couple of times, make the announcement, our relationship with the U.S. has changed and it's changed forever. So the question, you asked this in your piece, how do you extricate, you being Canada, from America?
Well, I mean, not to sell too much, but I do have a podcast out now called Gloves Off, where it's an 8-part series where we actually try to answer that question sort of brick by brick, like what it means militarily, what it means technologically, what it means economically. I mean, some of the answers are clearer than others. The economic one, I think, is actually it's not the most complicated issue that we face. The military question is much more difficult, as is the security arrangements. We don't really have a security service outside of the American security apparatus, and we need one immediately. Enormous changes are happening very quickly. Things that in ordinary countries are just sort of the ground floor, the foundations of their country, like having a military that can prevent an invasion, for instance, or a security service that can interfere in other countries' politics, to take another example. We've never had to do that. We've never had to do it. We didn't have to do it after the Second World War, and we didn't have to do it when we were part of the British Empire before then. So, there's some big foundational absences in our country that need to be built now. And it's going to be a massive mindset shift for this country.
You know, I think back to something I heard a couple of weeks ago. In the midst of all this trade that's, the deals that are not actually being done, talked about, but nothing really has changed. In fact, the news gets worse before it gets better for Canada. And someone suggested as a plan or as a theory, maybe the plan here long-term is, since it's so difficult to deal with someone who changes their mind, Donald Trump, on a fairly regular basis, maybe we just wait him out, because how bad could the next administration be in 3.5 years from now?
Well, see, this to me is the most dangerous idea in Canada. And it's an idea that's, of course, that this is what people in administrations, in bureaucracies want to believe, right? That this is all going to go back to normal because it's just Trump. And the truth is that the American government has been in a steady breakdown since 2008. I mean, I wrote about this, and you've had me on the show to talk about the next Civil War before a couple times, I think. Like, they're in the middle of a very serious breakdown, and Donald Trump is a symptom, not a cause. And we have to be prepared for a much weaker, much more violent, much less reliable country to our south, and one that is the slip into authoritarianism is not just Trump. It is actually the incredible levels of inequality they have. It is their hyperpartisanship. It is the decline in trust in institutions. It is the decline of the legal system. All of these things are, elements of what sociologists call a complex cascading system. We have to get out of the way when this star explodes. And that's what we're seeing to the south of us.
It's funny, one of your lines is, if the president is Tony Soprano, the Democratic governors who plead with Canadian tourists to return are the Carmelas, right? It's funny because someone mentioned the other day, this may have been just yesterday, right? Donald Trump letting chip companies know, Intel, NVIDIA, et cetera, AMD, that, you can go ahead and do business with China, despite the fact he said that they couldn't sell their chips last time around. Now he says they can, but it will cost you 15% of your profits, which will go to the American government. So that's as close to Tony Soprano as I could imagine you could get.
Well, the Wall Street Journal described it as America heading towards state capitalism. I mean, I think it's much more simple. It's caudillismo. It's what you saw in South America during the period of their authoritarian rulers. The leader just gets a cut of everything.
Yeah.
He's like the patron, and he just gets a cut of everything. And I think that's what we're really dealing with here. We're not dealing with anything as sophisticated as the Chinese state capitalist model or something. Like, it's just simply gangsterism.
I wonder at the end of the day, so obviously the Canadian, Mark Carney has realized this, right? It's one thing to say we're going to try to do a deal and then realize at the end this is going to be virtually impossible to do. What's the suggestion here on what we should be doing going forward, other than realizing, of course, that relationship has changed for the worse, for good? What do we do?
Well, I think the fact that the first liquid natural gas shipments arrived in Korea in July, this is the beginning of the future for us. Diversified trade. I think being aware of resistance to America as such, is actually a very important thing. We are diversifying our trade. Also, of course, the internal trade barriers and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But I think we also have to. I mean, again, I did the podcast. I think there's a lot of issues. There's the disinformation war that is spilling across the border that we need to take steps. There's I'm going to argue in a piece for the Guardian next week that we need a whole society defense like Finland has. We need essentially conscription or national service to prepare to prepare for a world where we're not. We're not under the protection is not going to come from elsewhere. We're going to have to protect ourselves, and and that requires a whole host of changes. Yeah. So I actually think the old way of Canadian living is kind of over. We need to start preparing for the new way if we want to stay a democracy and if we want to stay sovereign.
Lots to take in, Stephen. Always appreciate having you on. I thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.
Take care. Stephen Marche. You can read the opinion piece. It's in the New York Times. As I said, it's interesting, too, if you think about it, if everything has changed And, it's dangerous to think that, well, once Donald Trump is gone, everything will get back to normal. Where are we going to be in 3.5 years from now?